All right, so welcome everybody to the ninth seminar of the Contemporary Women's Writing and Medical Humanities online seminar series, organised with the support of the Centre for Contemporary Women's Writing at the Institute of Modern Languages Research in London. This online seminar series for postgraduates and early career researchers seeks to explore how contemporary women's writing in particular, whether it's fiction, poetry, autobiographical or philosophical writing, for example, is currently engaging with issues such as illness, disease, healthcare, medical practice, and clinical institutions. There are a wide range of themes being covered, and we have 13 seminars, so yeah, a couple more this spring, and we have an upcoming seminar, upcoming conference at the end of July, which will be a continuation of the themes that we're covering in the seminar series, with a few added extra topics to broaden out the scope. I'll be putting, towards the end of the seminar, I'll be putting the link to the Twitter page and also to the CFP for that. So if you have any kind of burgeoning ideas or areas of research, then yeah, please do get in touch. So we started this seminar series in September 2020, and we're continuing until the end of March roughly, with fortnightly seminars, always on Tuesday evenings at 5:30 p.m. UK time until roughly 7 p.m. You can register for the seminars via the IMLR, and again, I'll be putting the link for the next seminar in 2 weeks' time in the chat at the end of this seminar, and you can also have a look at the upcoming sort of seminars and their themes. So now for some Zoom house rules. So as you can probably see, the session is being recorded, so it can be uploaded to the IMLR website. Please feel free to turn your cameras off or on as you prefer. We'll be having today 3 15-minute papers and then a Q&A session. If you could all remain on mute too until the Q&A session, this would be much appreciated. During the Q&A, if you'd like to ask a question, please feel free to use the raise hand option on Zoom, and then Ben, Amelina, or I will ask you to unmute, and then you can say your question out loud, whether you have the camera on or off. You can also add your questions into the chat, and that can be found on the bottom on the bottom bar of Zoom. If you scan down, there'll be the chat icon there, and feel free to put your questions kind of gradually, or as we go through the papers, as the inspiration comes to you. Write your questions there, and we can come back to them later. Yeah, and when you write your questions in the chat, you can say them out loud, or you can nominate one of us to say them out loud for you, as you prefer. Okay, so before I let Ben take over, just as you can kind of see at the bottom, I was a bit late putting them on actually, there is live transcript going on, so it's not entirely perfect, but it's kind of works a bit. So if you can see, you should be able to see the live transcription of me speaking. If you can't, then again, if you scan to the bottom of the Zoom window onto the same bar where you have participants, mute, chat, etc., there should be a little button that says CC live transcript, and you can add like automatic live transcription, and that will work for all of the speakers. And something else that we started a couple of weeks ago is auto description. So just giving a brief kind of visual description of ourselves. So Ben, Amelina, and I, plus the speakers, will be describing ourselves briefly, and while the speakers will also be describing any images that come up in their PowerPoints. So yeah, I'm Becky, 29-year-old white British woman with glasses, ponytail, sort of blue frilly top. Okay, all right, so I'm going to pass over to Ben, who's going to do the next introduction.
Thanks very much, Becky. So I'll just describe myself. My name's Benjamin Dalton, and I'm a 29-year-old white man with a big brown beard and wearing a grey jumper and a like denim jacket on top. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce tonight our guest chair, Amelina Damlé. So Amelina Damlé is associate professor in French at Durham University. She works predominantly on questions of embodiment, affect, gender, sexuality, and race in contemporary literature and philosophy in French. Amelina has published widely in these areas, including numerous articles, book chapters, and 3 edited volumes. She is author of The Becoming of the Body, Contemporary Women's Writing in French, from Edinburgh University Press in 2014, and is currently working on 2 research projects, a monograph on embodiment, food, and the politics of consumption in Anita Devi's writing, and a comparative project looking at cross-cultural representations of birth in contemporary literature. So thanks very much, Amelina. I'll pass over to you now.
Thank you, Ben. So I'll start with my description. I'm Amelina Damle. We're doing ages, gosh. I'm a 40-year-old woman of Indian heritage. I have long dark hair, and I'm wearing a sort of a mustard-coloured top. Thank you so much to Ben and Becky for inviting me to guest chair this session. I've been following this seminar series, as much of it as I've been able to, with great interest, and thanks to Ben and Becky for putting together such a brilliant series. It's just been fantastic, and I'm particularly pleased to have been invited to guest chair this session on pregnancy and childbirth. As Ben mentioned, one of the things I'm working on at the moment is a project on literary narratives of childbirth. So I'm really looking forward to hearing our speakers today. So I'm going to, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speakers. We have 3 papers today. We have 4 speakers, 3 papers, and we'll take each paper in turn. We'll save all of the questions for the end. As Becky mentioned, you do feel free to type a question or a comment into the chat bar as the seminar progresses, and as you're feeling inspired. And I'll come to these at the end, and we'll do all of the questions together. So our first speaker today is Laura Lazadi. Laura is a researcher in the field of motherhood studies. She's currently a scholar at the Catholic University of America and an affiliate researcher at Franklin University, Switzerland. She holds a PhD in Italian literature from the University of Lausanne. She has conducted research and taught courses at the universities of Lausanne, Freiburg, and Franklin in Switzerland, and at George Washington University and the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. And she's the 2015-2016 recipient of the AAUW International Postdoctoral Fellowship at Georgetown University. And Dr. Lazadi is an affiliate member of the Center for Contemporary Women's Writing, and she collaborates with the Fondazione Sasso Corbaro for the Medical Humanities in Switzerland. Laura's research currently revolves around the representation of pregnancy, birth, and postpartum experience in contemporary culture and society from an interdisciplinary perspective. And in addition to her academic interest, she is also a fertility consultant, childbirth, and postpartum educator. Laura has provided her website, which I'll put into the chat bar in a moment, and you can find plenty of detailed information, more information about her work there. Her title today is How to Achieve a Positive Birth Experience, Female Agency and Childbirth in Swiss Italian Literature. So I'll pass over to you now, Laura.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Amelina, for this presentation. Can you hear me? Can you all hear me? Can you see my PowerPoint also? Yes. Okay, great. So I will start by the audio description. So I'm a Swiss.
Sorry, I can't actually see the PowerPoint. Can
you cannot? Okay. It was working before, so let me see. Becky, let's see. Maybe I'm trying to.
Yeah, if you 1 sec.
Should I share again? I thought it was right. Should I share it again? I need to share it one more time. Okay, let me try that then. Sorry about that.
Yeah, and if you can't find the window in the desktop,
screen, desktop, so it should be fine. Let me see if you can see it now. Can you see it now? Okay.
Yeah, if you go into presentation mode as well, then we'll just see the PowerPoint. Perfect.
Okay.
You got it.
Thank you so much. Okay. So for the audio description, I'm a Swiss-Italian white woman, and I wear glasses, and tonight I wear a dark gray top. And tonight I'm gonna talk about how to achieve a positive birth experience And I'm going to discuss in particular 2 Swiss Italian memoirs that have been written in the last couple of years. But before doing that, I would like to briefly introduce the birth culture in Switzerland. I would just summarize what we have in common in Switzerland among the 3 linguistic regions and what it is particularly relevant for my presentation tonight. So in Switzerland, we do have a culture of risk, and childbirth, pregnancy and childbirth do not make an exception. So this means that every pregnancy and every childbirth is considered either high or low risk, but the term risk, the idea of risk, is always present. We do not talk about normal pregnancy. And this culture of risk leads to an overuse of ultrasound and prenatal tests during pregnancy and a high level of obstetric intervention during childbirth. We do have in Switzerland, compared to other countries such as the Netherlands or the UK, to make a few examples in Europe, a low level of midwifery-led care, which is what it is considered nowadays the best option for physiological pregnancies. And in Switzerland, there is still a stigma around home birth or giving birth in a birthing facility. So there are very few women who take this opportunity because it is still stigmatized. So it's not very common compared to other European countries, such as the Netherlands, for instance, where it is the norm. The Swiss healthcare system is very expensive. So Switzerland is the 2nd most expensive place in the world to give birth to a child. And this does not necessarily lead to better outcomes. So this means that there are still a higher ratio of maternal mortality and infant mortality than other developed countries, for instance. They are low, but they're still higher than other countries. And probably the most important data is that 1 in 3 women experiences trauma during childbirth, which is pretty common to other European countries. So it is not a peculiarity of Switzerland, but it's pretty huge in my opinion. So now I would like to introduce the first memoir I'm going to discuss tonight, which was written by Isabella Pellizzari Villa in 2018. And all the translations are mine. So the title, I've translated the title in English. It would sound, I Wanted to Give Birth in Holland, Story of an Announced C-Section. And Isabella Pellizzari talks about a negative birth experience. She had a C-section in a private clinic, and she decided to write a memoir in order to overcome her traumatic experience. So this memoir could be considered as a therapeutic memoir. It is a hybrid genre text. It is a memoir because Isabella talks about her birth experience, her pregnancy and birth experience, but it is also an essay because Isabella did a lot of research in order to write this memoir, and she gives detailed evidence-based information for women to follow, for women who want to take wants to have an empowered experience and want to take informed decisions about their childbirth. So her agenda is dual. She wants, on one hand, to denounce obstetric violence, and on the other, she wants to inform and empower women through her experience and through the information she is providing. According to Isabella, there is a wrong culture of birth in Switzerland, and she's denouncing this wrong culture of birth and also challenging this wrong culture of birth. So according to her, all what matters nowadays is that babies and mothers are alive, which of course it's very important. It's a very important outcome. But in her opinion, it's not all that matters because this reinforces the idea of maternal sacrifice. So the idea that women and mothers in particular had to go through everything in order to have an healthy baby. And this in her experience, led to a lack of empathy from family and doctors who did not understand her pain and her trauma. And her trauma in particular was not acknowledged because she was constantly told by family members and doctors that she was not supposed to complain because she had 2 healthy daughters and she was alive. So they could not understand her pain and her trauma. Another important aspect she mentions is that pregnant women are often considered as sick bodies to be cured, and not as human beings, not as people. And in her case, the situation was worsened by the fact that her pregnancy was considered a high-risk pregnancy because she was pregnant with twins. And she's denouncing basically the lack of options she had. So in the Italian part of Switzerland, she was not allowed by law to give birth at home, for instance, or she was not allowed to give birth in a birthing facilities. So her only option was the hospital, and she had to be assisted by a doctor. Another aspect she is denouncing is that midwives and doctors are losing their skills. So in the past or in other regions, probably she would have found doctors who were able to help her, to assist her in delivering twins via vaginal birth. But that was not allowed to her. So it was just easier to perform a C-section because she could not find OBGYNs that were actually able or wanted to try to assist her in a vaginal birth. And this happens in many other cases, she denouncing also, like in the event of babies who are in a breech positions. We midwives and OBGYNs are losing their skills and are no longer able to assist women in these special circumstances. Women are also responsible of this situation, according to Isabella Pellizzari, because they tend to be passive. So they do not ask questions that are important to them because they were taught since they were little to behave like good girls and not ask questions that are important to them. And on the other hand, doctors tend to have a paternalistic attitude, so they do not inform women if they are not asked the right questions, which leads to a lack of communication or misinformation, which doesn't help women to take informed decisions. And in her case, there was also a lack of trust in her OBGYN that did not actually make her change her doctor eventually. So even if she didn't trust her doctor, she didn't dare change or look for another doctor, but she preferred just to stay with that person, which is pretty common according to recent research. It's something pretty common in women. Even if they don't trust their doctors, they just don't change it for her. Other challenges she is mentioning in her memoir are related to the fact that childbirth is considered normal only in retrospect, which means that doctors feel entitled to perform all the package of exams and interventions. And in her case, all the exams and interventions were given for granted only because she decided to give birth in a clinic or in a private clinic, or better, she was obliged to give birth in a clinic because she didn't have other options. She also denounces that the OBGYNs often threaten their patients. She was told by her doctor that he would revoke his care if she did not comply with his advice, for instance. And she was also told during childbirth that if she did not push her baby out, they will cut, which is actually what eventually happened. So in her opinion, one of the points that she's making is that non-necessary interventions or interventions that are perceived as non-necessary because of lack of communications can lead to a traumatic outcome. So it is very important to find a way to communicate with their care providers in order to avoid traumatic experiences. I will now read a few quotations from her memoir related to the cultural perception of risk she is challenging. The first one is related to the culture of risk in childbirth. And I quote from Isabella Pellizzari Villa's memoir: "One of the arguments justifying hospitalization of all birth is the possible sudden onset of a serious complication. It is as if all hikers were being tailed by a rescue helicopter when they take a trip to the mountains." End of quote. The second one is about biomedical risk, which in our society is considered are more acceptable than natural risk. And she says, I quote, "The biomedical model does not eliminate the dangers of birth. In doubtful cases, natural risks are rated higher than those of medical intervention because they are perceived as less controllable," end of quote. And the last one is about the perceptions of risk in home birth versus hospital birth. And she says, I quote, "Home birth is perceived as safe in the Netherlands, where I would add it is the norm, and dangerous in the United States," end of quote. But of course, also in Switzerland, since it is stigmatized and considered dangerous. The other memoir I would like to introduce tonight is written by Angela Notari, and she published a memoir about her positive birth experience. The title is "What Unites Us? From Midwife Lucia to Our and Your Childbirth," and was published in 2019. Angela talks about her empowering birth experience in a birthing center. And like Isabella Pellizzari's text, is a hybrid genre memoir. So it is a memoir because she talks about her childbirth, but it is also a biography because she talks about the lives, personal and professional lives of the midwives she met. And it is an essay because she gives evidence-based information useful for pregnant women and mothers. Her agenda is dual. She wants to celebrate the role and importance played by midwives in her positive birth experience, but she also wants to inform and empower women through experience and evidence-based information. Some of the key aspects for a positive birth experience, according to Angela Notari, are education. She insists a lot on education, the fact that women need to read and get the information in order to be able to consider all the options and take informed decisions. They also need to find, in her opinion, the right care provider, so someone who is on board with them and is willing to assist them in their decisions in order to build a good relationship with their healthcare provider and be able to ask the questions which are important to them. She stresses the importance of midwives in a positive birth experience. And she also insists on being flexible because she really thinks that women need to be open and need to be able to change their plans if special circumstances arise. Because she's really convinced that even in case of special circumstances, women still have options and they can still take informed decisions and have a positive birth experience. Of course, this didn't happen to her because she was lucky. So luck is also a key aspect for a positive birth experience, like everywhere in life. So everything went as she had planned. And for this reason, probably she was also very satisfied about her personal childbirth and pregnancy experience. Some challenges, according to Angela Notari, are related to privilege and stigma. Privilege because she was privileged. She had the chance to choose the birth she wanted because she was a wealthy woman and an educated, highly educated woman. And according to recent research, there are highly educated women, those who consider the options to give birth in alternative places, like at home or in a birthing facilities. She was also privileged because giving birth in the Italian part of Switzerland at home or in a birthing facility would be more expensive than a hospital, because in the hospital everything is covered by the healthcare insurance, whether in a birthing facility not everything is covered. So women need to be very motivated and have the financial resources to make these decisions. The other aspect is related to stigma, because as I previously mentioned, it's not very common to give birth in a birthing facility or at home. Women who decide to give birth in a birthing center are still stigmatized, and Angela Notari mentions that she was told that she was going back to the Middle Ages, that she was an irresponsible mother that was putting in danger her own child, which was very difficult for her to take because she was trying to make the best decisions for herself and her family, and it was very difficult to accept those comments. even though recent research confirmed that home birth and giving birth in a birthing center are as safe as giving birth in a hospital, and sometimes even safer, because there are less interventions, unnecessary interventions in a birthing center compared to a hospital. So in conclusion, to summarize, some of the aspects in common in those two memoirs are related to the fact that those are two books that are written by women for women. They could be considered self-support, like virtual self-support group or self-help books. It is important because they consider it important to share intimate and private experiences with other women. They have a clear feminist agenda, so they consider themselves as a childbirth feminist, and they want to challenge the culture of birth in order to empower women through evidence-based information, but also through personal experiences, which are not mainstream experiences, but alternative experiences of women who decided to choose other options which are not considered by the majority of people in the Italian part of Switzerland. So I have, those are a few works that I have been using to prepare my paper tonight. And I thank you very much for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions later on after the other two presentations.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was really, really fascinating. And I mean, it's so interesting to see that the kind of the swell over the last few years of narratives that are appearing across cultures around birth itself, rather than the broader experience of motherhood and mothering, that birth is becoming much more central as a literary topic. It's really, really, really interesting. Thank you so much for that. I have plenty that I want to ask you, but we'll move on to the next paper for now. So we have two speakers who are delivering the next paper. They are Sumiya Kashiyap and Priyanka Tripathi. Sumiya Kashiyap is an Institute Fellow in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences in Patna, India. For her PhD dissertation, she is working broadly in the field of medical humanities. She intends to analyze issues of infertility, maternal health, with special reference to Indian women's writing. And Priyanka Tripathi is an associate professor of English in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, the Indian Institute of Technology, Patna. She has published with various journals, including Indian Literature, Literature and History, the Journal of the Graphic Novel and Comics, Contemporary Asia, Postcolonial Studies, and so on. She is also the section editor in the Rupkatha Journal. She works in the area of Indian writing in English, place and literature, gender and sexuality studies. And the title of their paper today is Practicing the Humanities, Female Fertility, Artificial Reproductive Technology, and Contemporary Indian Women's Writing. So over to you both, Sumiya and Priyanka.
Thank you so much, Emelina. Soumya will be presenting this particular paper, and then maybe I can take up when questions come. And of course, I'm also 40-year-old, and I'm an Indian, brown, and I'm wearing a sunshine yellow.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you, Ben and Becky, for organizing this brilliant seminar. And I'm so glad to be a part of it. And well, I am a brown 26-year-old woman of Indian origin. I'm wearing a red hoodie with black muffler on. Well, I'm so sorry, but I won't be able to share because I guess Laura is still sharing her. Okay, can I now share my screen? Is it visible? So I'm so I, along with Dr. Priyanka Tripathi, will be jointly presenting a paper entitled Practicing the Humanities, Female Fertility, Artificial Reproductive Technology, and Contemporary Indian Women's Writing. To begin with, this is the brief outline of the presentation, introduction, socio-cultural aspect of infertility, in which I'll suggest how infertility has been stigmatized in Indian society, and due to such stigmatization, how women take recourse to the reproductive technologies will be discussed in my third chapter. In the third slide, I'll move on with feminist theory and motherhood, and then I'll discuss the two primary texts that I have discussed in this particular article, the novel Home and Malicious Medicine, my experience with false and falsehood in infertility clinics, which has been written by Manju Kapoor and Anita Devin, respectively. I'll go on with objectives, methodology, and conclusion. Introduction. In medical terminology, infertility has been defined as the inability to conceive despite cohabitation and without using contraceptives. According to WHO, World Health Organization, infertility may be indicated by any of the following: never pregnant, no live birth, no child born, and even no child surviving first years or no child alive. However, according to the Encyclopedia and Dictionary of Medicine, Nursing, and Allied Health Sterility, infertility is the inability to produce baby, be it in terms of conceiving or stimulate conception. However, this definition seems incomplete as it does not encompass the socio-cultural aspects of it, ignoring the repercussions of this problem. Motherhood is a ground for arguing socially and culturally with a noticeable moral overlay. It has mystical, incomprehensible, and potentially complicated dimensions, particularly in patriarchal societies. Motherhood does not emerge from one defining dramatic moment, but it is a result of cumulative factors. It has generally been defined as women's primary role, especially in countries like India. Motherhood identifies a woman's identity, elevates her status in society, and becomes the sole purpose of her existence. Therefore, a woman who is unable to reproduce is treated as an outcast and subject to social stigma. Enforcing motherhood is central to women's identity through images, representations, and constructions of the maternal is usually perpetuated and enforced through mainstream cultural scripts, which forms the modus operandi of the pro-natalist project. Such unwarranted valorization of childbirth and mothering as the most venerable of a woman's gender roles devalue women as wombs. Contemporary social cultural formations are rife with notion that the only truly enlightened choice to make as a woman, the one that proves first that you are a real woman and second that you are a decent, worthy one, is to become a mom. And thus such hegemonic and normative construction of motherhood stigmatizes those who choose not to have children as well as infertile women at large, which brings into context the socio-economic status of infertility. In order to get accepted in the society, women tend to follow every practices that will make them a mother, be it to believe in any technologies, to take risk, or to intentionally, censor part of herself to avoid disruption in the existing cultural stability. And this entire process of trying to fit in the society and to not be considered as an inappropriate other has been termed agnosis by James Moffat. Society attributes infertility as a disease, bringing into concept of medicalization by Conrad and Schneider. Infertility is deeply feared by women. Their identity, status, and security are affected, and they experience stigmatization, isolation, and a loss of bargaining power and empowerment in the family and society. It is a major source of anxiety, leading to lowered self-esteem and sense of powerlessness. In the next slide, I'll talk about the excessive interference of reproductive technologies. The stigma related to infertility forces the couple to seek refuge in expensive, unnecessary, and experimental reproductive techniques. Technologization of biological phenomenon has reconstructed a primary conception about family and parenthood. In the process of liberating women from the burden of procreation, it has actually reinforced the bionormative concept of family and has denunciated any possibility of remaining childless in the presence of medical technologies. Resonating with Dorothy Roberts' statement in the article entitled Race and New Reproduction, in which she has argued that medical technologies inducing reproduction are more conforming than liberating. They more often than not reinforce the status quo rather than challenge it. Consequently, this can also give rise to debates who says that whoever opposes technological reproduction possesses no sympathy for the infertile. But isn't the word sympathy to be focused in the right place? And isn't promoting technological reproductive techniques in the name of sympathizing with the infertile will be basically promoting the violation that these medical techniques incur by treating wombs merely as a ground for commercial profit? Offering such interventions also becomes exploitation when the clinics of the medical officials do not spell out the pros and the cons and also limitations of these interventions. Because couples so desperately want to get pregnant that they will pay for virtually any treatment if they think it will increase their chances. According to the critics, marketing plays significant role at two levels. Firstly, its contribution in the social construction of motherhood, and secondly, its impact on the consumption experiences of women when they shift from pregnancy and procreation to child rearing. Marketing has led to an insightful insinuation which suggests that the language of the market has influenced practically all aspects of life, becoming the only viable vocabulary of moral and social constructs, substituting the civic culture with consumer culture and conceptualizing the citizens as enterprising consumers. Medical interventions convinces us to believe that pregnancy is eminently doable even at the ripe age of 40. Since the birth of the world's first test tube baby, Louis Brown, 40 years ago, an estimated 8 million test tube babies have been born worldwide, according to 2017's report compiled by the International Committee Monitoring Assisted Reproductive Technologies, an international non-profit organization. WHO estimates that there are between 120 and 160 million couples struggling with infertility worldwide. The in vitro fertilization is the most common form of ART. ART today is 30 billion industry in India with over 3,000 clinics across the country. In this slide, I have showed the fertility rate in India from 1880 to 2020. And the 2017 report stated that the fertility rate has come down by more than 50% from 4.97 to 2.3. Further, it will be reduced to 2.1 during 2025. As a result, there is a greater reliance on assisted technologies. These are some paper clips that shows the misuse of artificial reproductive technologies in India from different parts of India, Bangalore, Maharashtra, and how the infertility clinics are convincing the people that there is 70% success rate, but in reality, it varies from 30 to 35%. In this slide, I have showed how what some doctors believe about ART in India. For instance, Dr. Smita Pandey, head of the Department of Psychiatry at Delhi's Ram Manohar Lohia Hospital, claims the trauma of conception failure can be immense because a lot of people are made to believe that there are 50% chances of success. Dr. Rishikesh Rai, who heads the IVF Center at Mumbai's Lilavati Hospital and Research Center, asserts that there is no centralized data, so clinics can claim whatever they want. The Indian Council of Medical Research, ICMR, has national guidelines for accreditation, supervision, and regulation of ART clinics in India, but these are in effect suggestions. Dr. Nutan Agarwal, former professor of obstetrics and gynecology, explains there is a need for a centralized registry to record and standardize IVF data across the country. Without that, the clinics can promise patients anything. Feminist theory and motherhood. Feminist theory has considered motherhood as the root cause of women's oppression. Simone de Beauvoir, in the book The Second Sex, has considered motherhood as an institution and a custom that limits women's freedom. In the book The Second Sex, she has used the term slavery to reproduction to reveal how motherhood strategically became the part of patriarchal structure. Beauvoir believed that women can only exert freedom over their own lives and can have both career and children if social parameters and conventions was altered. Shulamith Firestone, in the book The Dialectic of Sex, The Case for Feminist Revolution, proclaims women to be the sex class whose subjugation was rooted in her biological function of procreation or reproduction. Shulamith Firestone promotes that the freeing of women from the tyranny of reproduction by every mean possible. And by every mean possible, she meant freeing from the technological interference in the process of procreation, thus liberating women from the burden. Whereas Shoma Chatterjee, in the book The Indian Woman's Search for an Identity, asserts that for a woman, her fertility and her infertility is converted into a powerful instrument of socio-economic and political control in the hands of a male-dominated system, doctors and medical scientists included. Yashodhara Bagchi, in the book Interrogating Motherhood, claims that it is essential for understanding how the global capitalist system is at work in making motherhood an exclusive site of glorification for women. She argues that motherhood becomes a tool of women enslavement when placed within the intersecting grid of state, family, culture, scientific, and technological enterprises. Amrita Nandi, in the book Motherhood and Choice, Uncommon Mothers and Child-Free Women, forces us to rethink and question that if autonomy is critical for humans, why do humans have little or no choice vis-a-vis motherhood? Do women know they have a choice? If they do, how free are these choices in the context where the self is socially mired and deeply enmeshed into the familial? Maitri Krishnaraj, in the book Motherhood in India, Glorification Without Empowerment, criticizes the fetish of new reproductive technologies. These technologies, such as in vitro fertilization and intrauterine insemination, could otherwise be subversive and empowering owing to their potential to challenge kingship based on procreation and could herald freedom of choice. In these slides, in my research paper, I have primarily dealt with two texts, Home by Manju Kapoor and Malicious Medicine, My Experience with False and Falsehood in Infertility Clinics by Anita Devin. Home talks about the social construct of motherhood, whereas the next novel talks about the overindulgence of ART industries. Home has been written by Manju Kapoor and has been published in the year 2006. It captures the trials and tribulations of two sisters, Rupa and Sona, who are not being able to conceive. And the entire theme of the novel is encapsulated in its very first line, when it states that Mrs. Sona and Mrs. Rupa Gupta, sisters both, were childless, which suggests that how women are only identified till the time they are playing the role of a mother. They have no other identity other than motherhood. It also kind of introduces us to Melanie Notkin's term mom-opic, which means a myopic perception of womanhood as motherhood. Throughout the course of the novel, we see that how the author has revealed how the author has revealed that babies are generally treated as middle-class accessories. There is a line in the novel when they say that Sona is of no use, which suggests that how the word use has been treated for women as if they are breeding machine, which need not be maintained if it fails to achieve the function for which it is intended. Just as the cow is fed so that it will produce milk, or a goat that is fed before being taken to the altar for being sacrificed, so also is the woman of the house given food to eat in order that will produce offspring. This makes me talk about the Marxist theory of the division of labor, which offers an interesting interpretation on the concept of fertility. The work performed by men are generally considered of surplus value, whereas the women who are supposed to take care of the family and children is considered unremunerated and thus they are of use value. Since the childless woman produces neither surplus value nor use value, she is degraded by society. This entire concept of how women are cursed if they are not playing the conventional roles that they are supposed to highlights Virginia Woolf's use of the imagery angel in her book Professions of Women to signify the dominant ideology in manipulating women to be the angels in the household. The entire In the entire novel, we see that patriarchy has played a very significant role and how power works in the society. We have to see that there is in the novel we see that there is nobody forcing both the sisters to conceive. However, they themselves feel that they are not being able to give their husbands children, which suggests, which brings into context Foucault's use of power in the book Discipline and Punish, and also in the book History of Sexuality, when he says that when he defines this entire working of power in patriarchal society, he defines as biopower, which means by which he means that power that exerts a powerful positive influence of life. However, this new definition of biopower has profound transformation on the mechanisms of power, as it differs from what Foucault calls juridico-discursive concepts of power as something negative, a power that associated with the form of limit or lack. Foucault affirms that biopower plays an integral part in the development of capitalistic society, making the controlled insertion of bodies into the machinery of production and the adjustment of the phenomena of population to economic processes possible, and giving rise to the concept of docile bodies to describe the dominance of politics in producing passive, subjugated, and productive individuals, which suggests how sexuality serves as the main constituent of power, and it is not imposed upon us by any dominant group, but it comes from within, from below. In the next novel, Anita Devin, who is married at 23 and is very impatient as a year has passed by and she has not been able to conceive, spurred by family, friends, and her own sense of desire and inadequacy to have a child of her own flesh and blood. She decides to seek the help of medical sciences. The novel is not just about the physical ordeal and the psychological trauma Anita went through. It asks larger questions about the sanctity of life and the place of ethics that separate the medical professions from the assembly line production. It also unravels the truth that how India has neither guidelines nor legislations for the ethical practice of ART. It also aims to fill this lacuna and set up guidelines for the ethical practice of acceptable ART methods and for taking measures for setting up of an independent body through legislation for accreditation, regulation, and supervision of infertility clinics in India. In India, because of there is a lack of health education and awareness regarding one's own rights and resources, makes it impossible for infertile couples to protest against misdeeds in the ART field. The ART has emerged as a hope technology, and thus the couples blindly follow the clinics, which brings into context Althusser's concept of ideology, which according to him operates as ideological state apparatus, such as educational institutions, religions, organizations, family, and the media, which interpolates individuals as subjects. Drawing upon the Althusserian formulation of ideology, Judith Butler affirms that gender inequalities are constructed within such ostensibly apolitical social formations where the girl child is girled. These are certain objectives of my paper. It tends to examine the treatment of infertility as an illness, forcing women to position themselves as an inappropriate other in society. The article also questions whether an overindulgence with ART reduces the womb to a mere ground for commercial profit. I have employed Louis Althusser's ideological state apparatus to showcase how society interpolates women as a breeding machine, and we have to notice one point, that women are never forced. They are rather convinced that they need to seek refuge in reproductive technologies, because if they haven't, then they have not done what it takes to be a mother. So rather than becoming a boon, the technological reproductive the technology has actually proved to be a burden on them. I've also employed Michel Foucault's biopower and biopolitics to depict the different modes of subjectification of the body through patriarchal society, and to show how the new definition of power is different from what Foucault called juridico-discursive, as power no longer is imposed upon us, rather comes from within, from below. In conclusion, considering the right to reproduce as one's natural right and enabling technological reproduction as an approach poses a burden on women to complete their incompleteness by procreating. The infertility literature can also serve to remind us that it is not only women who reproduce, undergo medicalization, and experience stigma, but men too need to be a part of research on gender and health. It also forces us to rethink that the increasing medicalization of women's body should be addressed by placing the issues of safety, informed choice, and ethics in context to reproductive technologies. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sumiya. That was wonderful. And there are so many resonances coming out there with Laura's paper as well, in terms of thinking about medicalization, power, subjugation, but also lots of questions around stigma and stigmatization as well. I'll be looking forward to talking, drawing some of those themes together across your papers. We'll proceed to the final paper now. So I'll introduce Kalyan Ng, who is a visiting assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh. Her book project, Wounded Writings, Joe Bosquet, Hervé Guibert, Violette Leduc, and Simone Weil, analyzes how the text becomes a tool for survival when violence and suffering alter the body. It unfolds as 4 case studies of 20th century French authors who write about their wounds, be they literal, in the case of Bosquet's war wound, Guibert's AIDS, be they imaginary, in the case of Leduc's paranoia about her illegitimacy, or self-inflicted, as in the case of Weil's hunger strikes. It investigates writing as a performative and transformative act, and offers a reassessment of agency via self-invention in the face of adversity. And her title today is The First Days of Maternity in Contemporary French Literature. So over to you, Kalyan.
Thank you so much, Amelina. As for the description, I am a 30-year-old French and Cambodian woman with dark hair, and I'm wearing a navy sweater with a shawl. And I'll just share my screen. The successful self-help book, Bringing Up Bébé, considers the French mother as an exception and a model of modern motherhood, without allocating much attention to the financial support and care structures that are part of France's natalist policies. And I would explain what Elisabeth Badinter refers to as the special case of French mothers who bear many children but seldom breastfeed. Under expert and elegant maternal guidance, the French toddler eats normal food, is patient, and sleeps through the night. However, in France, sharing personal experiences of maternity has long been looked down upon until a few years ago with the publication of the collective volume Naissance, in which several women novelists, including Camille Laurence, Marie Dariussec, and Catherine Cusset, wrote about the experience of childbirth in first-person narratives. In 2018, 2 autofiction novels focus on the delicate and paradoxical feelings of a new mother, Amandine D, La Femme Brouillon, and Maria Pourchet, Toutes les femmes sauf une. Detailing physical exhaustion and moral hesitations around bringing up bébé in a chaotic world, the protagonists question feminist values as they abandon their ideal of a perfect mother when their bodies change in order to give life. These intimate reflections alter literary modes of address. This narrator speaks of herself in the third person when she tries to become a mother. Porcher's narrator addresses both her abusive mother and her newly born daughter, trying to break free from a wounded genealogy. In grappling with their doubts about feminist motherhood, both women denounce the treatment of mothers in contemporary French society, beginning with obstetric violence at the private clinic or the public hospital. Obstetric violence is a generalized phenomenon that can include denial of treatment, verbal humiliation, invasive practices, a disregard for pain, lack of privacy, unnecessary use of medication, and even sexual assault. In Day and Porcher's novels, violence takes place through disrespect, lack of care, and trying to enforce unrealistic expectations. All these forms of violence disregard the female body in order to protect the child and ignore the notion of consent in treating the patient. For instance, when this narrator struggles to feed her newborn baby, the nurse puts cabbage leaves on her breast, yet asks Monsieur if he is okay with it. Embracing the personal as political matter, testifying on the first days of maternity reinforces the feminist commitment. In Changing Difference, Catherine Malabou notices that a woman philosopher is an impossibility because she does not generate concepts, only qualifies those that already exist. It may be, she writes, that woman does not invent philosophical questions, but she certainly does create problems. She puts a spoke in the wheels of philosophers and philosophical categories wherever she can. The impossibility of being a woman thus becomes the impossibility of philosophy. The contemporary problems risen by the experience of motherhood are influenced by the reconsideration of the importance of phenomenology in 21st feminism. Following the Simone de Beauvoir consideration in The Second Sex on the situated experience of women, Manon Garcia, Camille Froide-Vaumetry, and Sarah Ahmed defined feminism as something felt and constructed through the body. Their works reassess female agency when structures of emotion function as social phenomena that dictate the way we lead our lives. Writing about one's pregnancy and childbirth engages a complex reflection on the female body in transition when maternity imposes an ethical transformation to rethink contemporary feminism as anchored in a body that acts like a passageway to connect mothers and daughters to come. Although it is more or less respected for its holy mission, the pregnant female body is considered as a public good that is being touched and commented upon freely. The female body is valued when it embraces nourishing ideals of generosity, care, and self-sacrifice. French pro-natalist policies are rooted in the Enlightenment period when philosophers such as Jean-Jacques Rousseau praised breastfeeding as a symbol of familial and social generation. With images of perfect motherhood abounding on social media, women are still defined by their maternal function and are expected to live their lives around a nuclear family. In La Femme brouillon, Dave writes, il y a toujours un moment où on rappelle à une femme le sens profond de son existence, procréer, toujours un ami, une tante, un dentiste pour lui rappeler qu'elle n'a pas encore d'enfant. However, she opens her novel by referring to motherhood as a disease with the word immunisé or a crime with récidive. Under a provocative and ironic tone, she advocates for un féminisme génital defined as focusing on corporeal ordeals faced by women without falling into the traps of differentialism that would be a feminist de génitrice. During the first wave of feminism, differentialists argued that women should have the right to vote in the name of potential motherhood because of their abilities to carry and educate children. During the second wave, l'écriture féminine existed on the psychic peculiarity of female creation to reach equality. Since the 70s, following Simone de Beauvoir, consideration on the feeling of alienation rooted in the female body, differentialism has been thought to enclose women in their reproductive endeavors. Today's Le Féminisme génital seeks to assess phenomenological experience of being a body into the world. When the nurse goes through the medical file, the narrator writes, Ici, j'aurais voulu que mon corps m'appartienne. Je connais des femmes qui se retrouvent en dehors de tout cabinet médical pour se transmettre des informations, se réapproprier des savoirs, se sentir à la hauteur de leur propre expérience, que leur corps ne soit plus une affaire de spécialistes. Peut-être que ça prête à rire. Des femmes qui examinent leur vagin à l'aide d'un petit miroir. Peut-être aussi que la révolution commence là. As explained in the Vagina Monologues, revolution begins by calling une chatte. However, the nurse preparing women to go into labor silences the pain they feel. Il est interdit de prononcer le mot douleur. When the moment comes, though, the narrator confesses that the pain reveals an epistemic experience of the limit. La douleur ne me permet plus d'avoir un point de vue féministe sur la question. The dichotomy position induces a loss of control and an increased sense of vulnerability from the mother. As she gives birth to her baby, the narrator transforms herself into une femme lézard, an animalistic entity devoid of modesty or dignity, with the strength to endure the pain and the humiliation. The lizard seems chosen as a reference to the reptilian brain, often thought to be the size of maternal instinct. As a wild animal, she struggles to adapt to her allocated quarters in the maternity ward. Le rythme de la maternité me fait violence. Notre endroit n'est jamais clos. Toujours la porte qui s'ouvre. Toujours des questions et des soins urgents. Les soignantes parlent trop fort et leurs mains sont glacées. La femme lézard voudrait mordre ses intruses, refuse d'admettre qu'elle a besoin d'elle. Au coin nurserie, je ravale mes larmes face au schéma en 6 étapes pour le bain de bébé. When she returns home, the new mother fears invasion from the outside world, behaves as if she was still under surveillance. Getting up close and personal with diapers, she begins to understand the difficulty of accomplishing care labor on a daily basis. Je pense à toutes ces femmes qui exécutent ces soins à la chaîne dans l'indifférence totale. Quoi qu'il arrive, notre corps commence et finit entre les mains des autres. Aligning with Carol Gilligan's definition of care, she understands this ethic through the experience of motherhood. At first, the lizard woman is eager to conform to picture-perfect parenthood, sacrificing herself for her baby's well-being. Then she has to eradicate this monster to reclaim some independence as a modern woman through deconstructing mundane acts on a daily basis. In the second novel, Toutes les femmes sauf une, Maria Pourchet's narrator knows she is said to be a bad mother, for she has many examples to draw on in her own family. Written in a very informal tone, the incipit mixes life and death, joy and punishment, through the constant use of double entendre that I have put in underlined word here. Deux murs violets, disons mauve, de murs gris le reste en blanc. Un trépied à perfusion dit encore potence. Les règles d'or de l'allaitement, 4. Et sans aucun rapport, une affiche CGT, personnel de santé, défendez vos droits le 1er mai. C'est passé. On m'étale sur un genre de toile cirée entre 2 éventrés de la veille. Les chambres particulières, tu peux toujours demander, mais c'est fonction des places, il n'y a pas de j'ai payé qui tiennent. Ce n'est pas une toile cirée, mais un drap, l'odeur, c'est normal. À mes pieds, le berceau qu'il ne faut pas renverser, toi dedans, une étiquette dessus, Adèle. Je suis collante, évidée, plus près du fond que jamais. Je connais quelque chose comme la terreur d'un naufragé et sa fatigue. Je cherche un truc, n'importe quoi, qui ressemblerait à qui je fus la veille encore. Je n'aperçois ni mon visage ni mon sac. Désormais, la fin du monde commence à midi. The narrative voice addresses a two, who is both her daughter and the reader. She designates the nurse as la rose ou la verte by the color of their uniforms. She complains a lot about their neglect. First, when she struggles to get some milk out of her breast, une femme en rose beaucoup plus jeune vient beaucoup plus tard, s'étonner qu'on m'ait privé si longtemps du comprimé pour vache indigne et me l'apporte en 3 secondes. Then, when she wants to bathe a baby, je veux te laver. Je demande poli, une infirmière qui non moins polie m'envoie paître. She summarizes her ordeal thus. On m'a traité comme un mammifère, pas plus. She's being treated as a mammal. The mutual dehumanization stops when she finally acknowledges a nurse's name, Corinne. Similarly to La Femme Brouillon, Pourchet's narrator also comes to appreciate care, but only at the end of her stay. The novel structure presents an autobiography constructed through different vignettes. As she is giving birth to her daughter Adèle, the narrator is a newly born woman herself, following Hélène Sixou and Catherine Clément remarks in the same book, integrating her own abusive mother's violence and transforming it into a force of life. Focusing on the phenomenology of labor, mentioning the disorientation of new mothers, the physical pain, the difficulty of bonding with the baby, all reframes the concept of birth as a feminist work in progress, that is, an experience that society needs to reflect on to constantly improve and adapt to the demands of the new generation of feminists. Aiming for a more ethical experience of birth entails a critical distance that Husserl and Merleau-Ponty named an époque, a suspension of judgment. Frédéric Jacquet writes in the volume directed by Claire Marin and Frédéric Worms, il faut, selon nous, concevoir une époque natale, c'est-à-dire une époque effectuée selon le phénomène de la naissance qui se double d'une époque selon l'enfance, donnant à voir la dynamique de l'apparaître, le co-devenir de l'homme et du monde. Considérer le phénomène de la naissance implique une régression dans la chaîne des générations jusqu'au premier vivant et la découverte de la naissance métaphysique de la vie sous la figure de l'événement de son apparition. All of this describing a joint becoming shared between a single being and the world. Birthing, bringing a body into the world, is always a work in progress. It is already hinted at the title of both novels, with La Femme Brouillon, the Draft Woman, and Toutes les femmes sauf une, all women but one. But the very common experience of giving birth is an event that alters one's relation to oneself and to the world. And on immunity, an inquiry about vaccination, Ulabis reflects on the impossibility to remain perfectly immune to one's environment and ponders on Donna Haraway's remark on women's difficulties in reaching biological individuality due to their ability to make other bodies. Carrying a baby is a form of inclusion and evolution, as the fetus cells are integrated in the mother's body even when the pregnancy is terminated, a silent form of female evolution that would include all drafts of conception. The phenomenological turn of contemporary feminism reassesses the importance of first-person narratives. One might wonder if in both novels, the critical stance towards the standardized medical care received at the maternity is influenced by the trend of drug-free, intervention-free birth at home in the company of a carefully chosen doula that would be in a favor of a collective and collaborative work and would decenter the woman from the monopoly of reproduction, giving a more active role to their partners. Women sharing their stories, one by one, urge us to rethink the experience of birth. Their narratives also contribute to liberate the female body from the discourse of others. In today's France, the gynecologist and novelist Martin Wickler insists that debates on reproductive issues should be centered on women's responsibility and choice. If mothers are prone to criticize each other and bond around common struggles, making childbirth a public matter should unify a feminist we, one that would offer a new interpretation on the intimate stakes of reproduction, arguing that the vantage point of intersectional feminism would treat the question of fertility and raising a family as including all forms of motherings, even those detached from gestation and labor in their contribution to caring for the next generations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kellyanne. That was brilliant. I really enjoyed that paper. I'm working on naissance actually at the moment myself. I'm writing a chapter on that, so would love to talk to you about that particular text a little bit more. So we've got about 20 minutes to have a conversation about the papers and ask some questions. And I mean, one thing that came out to me across your papers was the ways in which feminist writers are interrogating or challenging the medicalization of the pregnant, the experiences of pregnancy, birth, and infertility, and that's been a sort of a feature of feminist writing around these subjects, has been to interrogate medicalization. I'm thinking of Adrienne Rich's really important work of Woman Born, for example, but also, beyond theory, also thinking about the kind of the more practical work, should we say, of Sheila Kitzinger and people like that, where there is this kind of the sense of wanting to reclaim the body from, Adrienne Rich puts it, from the kind of the forceps, the symbolic forceps of the medical environment, which has historically been male. And I was really struck across your papers that we're talking about the sort of the body construed here as sick, whether we're talking about the pregnant body or whether we're talking about the infertile body. We're still coming back to these kinds of perceptions of the female body as sick, as passive, as docile, in each of these cases. But at the same time, there is this sense of not being able, that being the sense of a prohibition to articulate pain, suffering, and the stigma that sort of, surrounds all of these experiences. And I wondered if I could just invite all of you to reflect a little bit further on this idea of the sick body. And perhaps to reflect on it in relation to the other papers that you've heard, because it seems to me that in the ways that you were presenting, Laura, for example, was talking about the pregnant body as construed as the sick body, and Sumiya was talking about the infertile body as the sick body, and then you were talking, Kellyanne, about motherhood as something that I must be immunized against. That came up in one of your quotations. And I wondered if we could sort of think collectively about what the feminist implications are for discourses surrounding the female body, and the reproductive body, if in all of these cases, whether pregnant or infertile, this discourse of sickness is prevalent.
So, can I go ahead? When you talk about this whole sickness discourse, in fact, if I can say, from menstruation to menopause, which is all, a natural kind of discourse in a woman's body, is in a way trapped within this discourse of sickness. And there is where the intervention of feminist reading through literature and otherwise is, kind of radical in the absence of a right word, reading, because it kind of appropriates the naturalness of what is happening to a woman's body. Coming to a specific paper that we spoke about, the infertility, in the course of Indian context, where science and technology met the sort of natural, not really sickness, but maybe a woman just can't conceive. It met, but it was all very sorted till the time this kind of amalgamation was happening. But in between came two things, culture and economics. So both kind of jeopardized the intention of the invention. So when you take up this ART, it began in a very good way. And when when we also talk about the artificial wombs, we only find the mention of artificial wombs in sci-fis. So why is it that it's not part of a natural, regular kind of fiction or short story, whatever? I mean, it's part of a sci-fi, which means it automatically believes that it is not something which is readily reflected in day-to-day course. So that is where somewhere I think we would like to pitch our argument, and especially one book, which is Pinky Virani's book, published by Penguin in the year 2016, which is about politics of the womb, the perils of IVF, surrogacy, and modified babies in the context of India. She's written very extensively about the whole discourse of artificial, ART, artificial reproductive technology in the context of India. And she gives a lot of illustrations from different literatures available, but not really in India. In India, we are still looking for a narrative which talks about artificial wombs in literature. I mean, of course, in sociology and all, there are a lot of debates around this particular phenomena. So right now, that is what I would like to talk about. And of course, motherhood, the first question that was very much there in the chat about the inappropriate adulthood. So what adulthood does is it basically safeguards the vulnerable positions. And in that sense, the moment a woman does not bear a child naturally, she becomes inappropriate. And yes, the implications are very much there when you talk about adulthood and motherhood becoming synonymous for being women, because from the very beginning onwards, her identity is totally dependent upon the male counterpart, either in terms of her father or in terms of her husband. And finally, it reaches a kind of a salvation point only when she has a kind of a male child. Even that is something which is very much, if you read the ART techniques in India, it's not just about having a child, it's also about having a male child. So of course you can go ahead and the whole discourse of Indian patriarchal society very much impinges with the idea of technology over there. And that is why I said the economics and the culture make a mess out of the technological reproduction techniques, which are otherwise very beneficial for all sort of couples who are not really sick, but maybe striving to have a baby, and it's absolutely okay. So yeah, that's all I would like to say.
Thank you. Thanks, Priyanka. And I can see that there are a few more questions in the chat around assisted reproductive technologies. We'll come to those in a moment. I'd just like to invite Laura or Kalyan to come in on that initial question.
Yes, building on Priyanka's remark, I think that why there's so much insistence on sickness is that there is, first of all, a dichotomy between the mother and the child that is addressed in the, I don't know if it was on purpose, but in the essay, Donna Haraway's essay, Inappropriated Others, following the inappropriate body that you mentioned. And it is known in feminism today as the maternal fetus conflict. So who speaks for the fetus? Do we see the mother as a natural environment for the fetus to develop and not as a human being with an agency and choices to take? So I think that first of all, it is an assimilation of women with nature that drives let's say the medical profession to treat these women as natural bodies, and it is why there is many women writing about themselves as animals during childbirth, as the families are as well. And there is some sort of a site of transformation there and a site of rebellion as well, that to rethink the animal and the category animal and the category woman too.
Thank you, Kalyan. Laura, did you want to?
Yes, I would like perhaps to add a few other reflections I made about, in particular, feminist implications, because in my reading, what I noticed in these writers that have been publishing the last couple of years in Swiss Italian literature, but not only, it is also this idea, there is the idea of pathologizing of pregnancy, which are challenging, so they want to challenge that. But at the same time, those writers also want, and they're feminist writers, so they consider themselves as feminist, they also want to normalize pregnancy, childbirth, and to embrace physical aspects. So they also talks about miscarriages, for example. There is Angela Notari in her book. She talks about a positive birth experience, but later she has a miscarriage. And she talks about that because she wants to be honest with her readers. And she wants to talk when her body is working and when her body failed her. And she really thinks that, to be honest, sharing information, sharing also personal experiences is something that is good for feminism, in her opinion, because it is important that her fellow women knows that things like that can happen, and they happen pretty often. And if we are honest with other women, we can manage to, in her opinion, to really find a solution altogether, and talk to each other and find the way out, even if it is a dark moment. And that's probably something that I found also in other readings I've been doing about, for example, infertility. For what is concerning infertility, I've noticed that in the last couple of years, several writers, novelists, have been discussing the topics of infertility and how feminism failed infertile women. And last year, I read also this autobiographical essay by Alexandra Kimball, who talks about how feminism failed infertile women, and she talks about her experience. Because, of course, in her opinion, she sees the other aspect. She's a feminist, an infertile woman who became parents through surrogacy, and she wanted to discuss about her options as a feminist. And she had the feeling that her opinion and her voice was silenced in the feminist world because she would be considered under patriarchy and under commune essentialism, how women are seen. So I found that it's interesting to see those other feminist voices, which sometimes are in conflict with each other, but they're showing how women are diverse, and how, in my opinion, how really they are embracing more and more physical aspects and try to normalize also physical aspects in women's body, like also breastfeeding. It's more and more common in feminist authors of memoirs.
Thanks, Laura. And that's one of the things I find really interesting is I mean, I think you're absolutely right that there is this desire to foreground the physical experiences of pregnancy, childbirth, miscarriage, in ways that haven't really been articulated. You know, that the real physicality of it. You see it in things I've read recently, Pamela Ahrens's work, 11 Hours, which is just this wonderful narrative of labor, and the whole text is accounting for that very visceral experience. One of the things I find really interesting is that so many of the works that you've been talking about, all three of you, are sort of crossing boundaries in terms of genre. So they are works of autobiography, autofiction, but also essay, so memoir, but also essay, and taking this sort of informed but also theoretical approach and bringing those two together in ways that seem to be suggesting a sort of a feminist move beyond sort of embracing the physicality of the experience, but then also not being reduced as women to the physical, to the natural, being able to reflect on that physicality in informed, conceptual ways that can also be communicated. And I think that's really interesting to look at. I'm aware that there are questions in the chat bar, and Ali, you had a question about the inappropriate adult. Has that question been answered? Would you like to ask your question or elaborate upon it?
Sure. I guess the thing that is all just to say thank you to everyone. I'm a PhD applicant and this has blown my mind and it was brilliant, so thank you. But I was guessing just sort of more on how inappropriateness, and this could be, I guess, complicated depending on the age of the woman in question, but kind of how the inappropriate adult could be conflated or understood as the not adult enough. So how much is a woman then, how much then is motherhood conflated with adulthood, and sort of what implications does that have for younger women, but also what implications does that have for older women at the same time, and sort of how does that binary between like woman, adult, mother, and kind of sort of older childless adult sort of work? How does that work with sort of an age type idea? Sorry if that wasn't super clear.
So yeah, thank you, Ali, for that question. Of course, age is an important context. So if you see many women speaking on motherhood in the Indian context, especially I will talk about some, I did some survey on scientists, and they said particularly about very peak period of their career growth, and at the same time, they taking break from their career to have babies. So, you know, the very fact that they said that, oh, fine, we are in the field of science, and while motherhood can't wait, even the progression in science can't wait for me. So while catching up on one side of their life, which is personal life and having becoming a mother and stuff like that, they have actually missed out on their career progression, because what happened in the process of prioritizing motherhood over their career is that there is huge amount of loss that they faced in their career, because science and technology has advanced. So when they reach back to the field, probably it's not a level playing field for them. So, you know, so that means, yes, age it becomes an important factor, because I will only talk about India because that is the only context I'm familiar with. Between, you know, 18 is the age for girls to get married, and approximately in 1 to maximum 3 years, they are supposed to have babies, or baby for that matter. And then, of course, if you, there is also kind of, you know, an intersectional reading that you can do there between the urban women and the rural women. And in rural areas, you will still find women who are not aware of the contraceptives, and they go on having babies. There is no food, there are no resources, there is no education, but yes, there are babies. So, you know, and then there are no babies as well. And they feel sort of, and of course that is changing, because even if you see the infertility index, the statistics, it shows even male is infertile. But earlier, if I talk about, say, before the boom of ART came into picture in the context of Indian society, what was there was that the moment they do not have, these women, married women do not have babies, it was assumed that they are sick and they cannot produce babies, and therefore the husband had a kind of a right to marry again. So, you know, so everybody went on after him that because she's infertile, he should get married. So it was an assumption that happened there. So yes, age, even caste and class in the Indian context, you can talk about. Even that matters. If you do, if you read some sort of sociological interventions in terms of infertility, you will also find that it has a lot to do with also the caste and class episodes. So yes, that's very much there. I mean, of course, I mean, if I've answered that question in a way.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that really answers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Priyanka. We've got another question from Holly. Do you want to ask your question? I'm aware that we've just gone past 7 o'clock, but I think we can carry on the conversation for a little longer unless our speakers have to be elsewhere. But there are a couple of more questions. Holly, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, for sure. It was just about whether or not there's any chance for a feminist repurposing of assisted reproductive technologies, but maybe more, I think maybe that was already slightly answered. So maybe the second half of the question, which is, have you come across any positive or maybe in sort of sci-fi or speculative fiction examples of ARTs, in your research?
We haven't come across anything in literature, Indian literature as such, but yes, I mean, there are other fiction that we have read. So Indian, I haven't come across yet. We are still reading. I mean, it's for this conference, and thanks Ben and Becky for making us, read in this direction, because the moment our paper got accepted, and it gave us a way to think over this particular aspect of research and find out more on infertility. In fact, Sumiya is writing another paper, both of us are writing another paper on finding out if there are just the sociological, discourses available on infertility, because we haven't come across literature as such which specifically talks about artificial wombs. But yes, infertility, we spoke about Anita Devin, and we also talked about Manju Kapoor, that is of course there, and also we sort of I'll tell you about one text which probably is very significant in this context, is Perumal Murugan's One Part Women, where there is an entire cultural discourse of getting rid of infertility. So in that particular village, you will find that there is a deity where and there is a chariot festival which takes place, and one night all men are god in that particular temple, and women can go there, cohabit, and have babies. So culture also sort of how politicizes the process of infertility vis-a-vis the scientific impact, which is the contemporary trend. We are trying to draw a kind of contrast there. So we are working on that as well. So yeah, these are some of the recent scope of reading that we have we can give a sort of tread on. I mean, we are still in the reading process. So maybe next year when they organize conference, and if we get a chance to speak, yes, we will surely have a lot of inputs. But as of now, no. We haven't come across any literature specifically talking about artificial wombs. But yes, infertility, quite a big deal. That is discussed.
Anna, I don't know if that has answered your question as well, or whether you would like to come in and ask anything more in relation to that.
Yeah, well, thank you, Amelina. Thank you, Priyanka. Thank you all. This is a very, very interesting webinar, and maybe the most interesting I've been participating. So thank you all. I wanted to ask you to Priyanka and Sumiya, if there is any kind of a post-human childbirth or any post-human representation of childbirth and pregnancy in Indian literature, if there is something, if maybe there is some women writer who can who deal with the theme with a new approach, like a post-humanist one, I mean, with external uteri or artificial uteri or something else. And if there is some women writer who does it, does she puts the story in the contemporary world, or she uses science fiction, because in contemporary world, in the present world, it is impossible to represent this kind of post-human childbirth? I don't know if I managed to explain myself, sorry.
No, partly I think I will answer this question, but the next part, if it is in literature, I may not be able to really comment. But talking about culture, so most of the Western cultures we have seen, when we see very popular TV series or something, when the baby is to come, there is a lot of preparation going on. Also, the second part of it is like sex determination. They know, okay, this is going to be a male child or a female child, whatever it is. But in the Indian context, sex determination is not possible because there was this entire surge of female feticide and infanticide that happened in the 1980s and 1990s, and after which it became a kind of a criminal offense. Sex discrimination and determination for that matter. So what happened in the process? But yes, there are a lot of cultural narratives which are available, wherein the newborn baby for a particular 6 days or 12 days cannot wear new clothes. So inadvertently, the parents who are expecting babies, generally in India, many joint family setups are there. So grandmothers, they arrange for baby clothes from neighbors and relatives, and maybe sometimes siblings are there. So the elder ones' clothes are kept for the younger ones. So that is how the costume thing operates. So it's very, I don't know if I can say, it's very recyclable till the baby is 6 days or sometimes 12 days. And there is a kind of a ritual that happens. I'm particularly talking about Hindu thing, because Hindu culture, because that is what I'm familiar with, and that is what I have read also largely. So that ritual takes place, and after that ritual, of course, the baby is assigned new clothes. That also is probably one of the ways in which this whole sex determination can be, combated, because one is not aware what kind of baby is going to come. So, the nursery is not prepared and stuff like that. But yes, of course, talking about costume, that is one. Cultural narratives are there where, of course, the baby's costume is decided, that the new and versus the old, not like what the person should wear, but yes, in terms of new versus old. So that is there, of course, in narratives.
Thanks, Priyanka. I can see that Kalyan is putting some recommendations into the chat bar. Kalyan, would you like to come in and say a little bit more in relation to the politics of the womb? I'd like to invite both you and Laura to come and contribute on this subject as well, if you would like to, just to kind of wrap things up.
Yes, so I was just saying that France is very suspicious about implementing surrogacy. Which is why a lot of queer people go to Belgium or Spain, and it's a known fact, or even the United States. And there is a movie that was released in 2015, Evolution, in which mermaids force little boys to be surrogates for them. And it's very similar to the science fiction short story Blood Child by Octavia Butler. There's also a very new movie called Poisson Sex, in which it's in a dystopian future and there is no more fish, and it's about a father. It's about a biologist who wants to become a father, but the world has become sterile. Everything is sterile. So it is, I think those two movies offer insights about reproductive futurities that will be outside of the female body. But maybe off topic, maybe off the womb topic.
Laura, did you want to come in and say anything in relation to the sort of some of the things that are being said around the politics of the womb, and how I'm wondering how relevant some of these ideas are for your own research?
I've been researching infertility in the past, so related to the laws and above all, like in the Italian law, which was very restrictive. So I've been dealing with this kind of literature, and I know that there is a Marta Baiocchi in Italy. She wrote a book about it. It was like a book about the womb, artificial womb, which was pretty interesting in this field. But I've not really developed this aspect, so I mainly discussed other aspects and analyzed other aspects. But I really think that it is very interesting in a multicultural and transnational perspectives, because there are many links and comparisons that can be made across literatures and cultures. So I really see that in these discussions we can really find several links in the styles, genre, and topics, even though laws are different in each country. So probably some countries, like for instance in Italy, has insisted on other aspects, also because of the Catholic and also because of the church did not allow some of the procedures. In Switzerland is different. For instance, Swiss literature doesn't have this aspect, is not as much developed. So it is interesting to see the differences in each culture, but at the same time some similarities in the development of the topics. Yeah.
Does anyone have any final questions that they would like to ask any of our presenters? There are so many wonderful recommendations coming through in the chat bar that I'm also scribbling down and looking forward to exploring further. I think if we have no final questions, much as I would love to keep this conversation going, and I think Laura is absolutely right that there are so many interesting resonances across the different cultures that we've been talking about, and questions of stigma pervade despite the differences in political systems and cultural ways of determining fertility, birth, reproduction. That there are so many echoes across the papers that we've heard today. So I'm going to hand back to Becky and Ben to wrap up now, but thank you so much to all of our speakers. I've come away from this with so many thoughts that I want to take forwards, and I'll hand over back to Becky, I think, or Ben.
I'm thanks very much, Amelina. I'll just thanks so much to all of you. That was absolutely fantastic, and thanks so much to Amelina as well for guest chairing. That was really brilliant. And I'm definitely going to watch Poisson Sex as well, Kellyanne. Like I know that came out kind of in between the confinements, like the lockdown. I saw it advertised in the cinema, and I really want to see it, so I'll definitely go and see that. So yeah, I'll just introduce the next session, which will be on Tuesday again in 2 weeks' time. And that session will be on well-being in medical care. And we'll have 3 speakers for that as well. We'll have Maya Jane Bates, who'll be talking on exploration of well-being in the context of advanced cancer for households in Malawi. Cécile Lebleu, who will be talking on the feel-good novel and women's wellness. And Jane Hartshorn, who will be talking on women's contemporary illness poetry and the confessional, how the lyric I can reinstate patient subjectivity. So yes, definitely sign up for that if you haven't already. And also in the meanwhile, before that session, we'll also have the deadline for the conference that will be based on this seminar series, which I think Becky's just put in the chat there. So the conference will also be called Women's Writing and Contemporary Women's Writing in the Medical Humanities, and that will be an online conference, a 3-day online conference in July 2021, and the deadline for abstracts for that is the end of the month, the 31st of January. So please do send your abstracts for that. We'd love to hear from you. And yeah, another massive thank you to all of the speakers and to Amelina, and see you all next time.